Hi there! So I am doing the video reflection activity for the post or pre-survey data. And I've got my notes right here on my data results, my interpretations, and then I've got my criteria right here, so I'm going to be referencing that just to make sure I cover everything. So I wanted to start with what I got the lowest in. So the data showed that I was the lowest in informal assessments, which I wasn't super surprised about because that's one thing that I picked because I know I'm not very good at doing that. I know last year and the year before I would teach and teach and teach, and then I would test, and then I would be super surprised by the test results because I was like, oh crap, they didn't learn this, or oh wow, they actually knew that better than I thought. And so I felt like informal assessments was an important thing to work on. Sorry about that. So that I wouldn't be surprised by the test results. And then my students can also help keep up with where they are, and that can help them get to where they need to be. I do ask whole class questions, more than I realize, according to my evaluator. And then my students answered, or my survey results showed that I'm really good at asking whole class questions. So I'm good at that part. I know I like call on names and stuff too. I try to do that a lot. I'm okay at letting the class know how they're doing according to the survey results. And I need to improve on giving non-graded quizzes. Yeah, and that's kind of exactly it. So what I have started doing for each unit is I will give these quizzes, Q-U-I-Z-I-Z-Z. So they log on or they don't even have to log on. They just go to the website, put in the code, and they can use a nickname if they want, as long as it's appropriate, or they can use their real name because I don't collect the data, the individual data. This is kind of for them to see where they are. It's also a really good review. And so I host a game and they answer questions one at a time, and it gives them like the 4 answers. As soon as they click the answer, it tells them if they're right, and if they're wrong, it tells them the correct answer instead. And then on my screen, like at the front of the classroom, it has their nicknames, and they're constantly like moving up and down, and it shows their streaks so they can see where they are in relation to everyone else, and they can see like who's the top ones, who's still kind of working through it. They get like power-ups and memes, and it makes it kind of fun, but they also get an overall class percentage. So they can see where the class is as a whole, and then they can see where they are individually. And then I post the whole class percent on the board and make it like a competition between all my classes. And let's see. Right, evidence. Sorry. So evidence, I didn't think to actually save the data for evidence purposes, which I should have, but I can show like when I hosted the games and then the games, and then for future ones I can save and add to my portfolio for evidence of doing these. I've also tried to get better at like thumbs up, thumbs sideways, thumbs down as to what they think, how they think they're doing, which I know isn't really an informal assessment. But the other one I do is an exit ticket. I'll do an exit ticket with a question. Sometimes it's a higher order thinking question. Sometimes it's just a basic balance this equation, right? Or define synthesis reaction in your own words. And then they don't have to put their names on it or anything. They just turn it into me. I'm able to read through and get a quick idea of, okay, did they understand the lesson today or not so much? And then I'll save like the best ones to put on my bulletin board. And then I can take pictures of those responses for evidence as well, and maybe put like the question at the top. So that was my lowest informal assessments. My second to lowest, or my second to highest, my medium one was providing scales and rubrics. This one I chose because I learned about standard-based grading last year, and so I wanted to incorporate that in my classroom more. And in order to do that, I feel like it's important for the students to have the proficiency scales that I'm grading them on, and to have a rubric with it so they can kind of see what it is that they're supposed to be learning, essentially. So what I provide for them is a list of the skills that they will be learning, and 1 to 5 scale for them to rate before the lesson and then after the exam. Although I'm really thinking I should add a middle one so they can kind of do like a progress check. So like when we do the quizzes, or if we do like a quick CFA, then they can say, okay, I started at a 2, now I'm at a 3, and then after the test, maybe they go up to a 4, and they can kind of see that progress. So I can have that as my evidence. But what was really exciting about the data from this was that my students understand that what they do in class helps them achieve their learning goals. And that just made me like over the moon happy, because that means that they know, for the most part, the majority of them understand that what they're doing in class, it's not for a grade, it's to help them achieve their learning goals. So if you ask them like, why are you doing this? The answer's not, oh, I'm just doing this so I can get the grade. It's, oh, I'm doing this so I can get better at balancing equations, or I'm doing this so that I can learn synthesis reactions. Instead of just, oh, I'm just doing this so that I can get a grade for it. So that just made me really, really happy that was the highest. My students were, according to the data, my students were not clear on what the numbers on the scales really means. And this is where I needed to be more transparent. I think that's the main thing I need to do to improve my scales and rubrics is be more transparent, because I'll grade based on what they know instead of just the paper that they turned in that one day. So I'll grade what they know, and I'm doing it based on the scales, but I'm not being transparent about it to them. And then they don't understand, like, what does a 2 actually look like? What does a 4 actually look like? So one thing that I've done to improve this is when we came back from Christmas break, we spent the first day, we went over the rules, and then we talked about the scales and why I do them and what they mean. So I made the 1 to 5 more friendly language. When we first introduced them, we used the T-test language, like accomplished and distinguished, and most of my students don't know what distinguished means, which is really sad, but I've had that struggle. So I reworded them so that now 1, instead of beginning, 1 is struggling, 2 is passing, 3 is proficient or solid. I know they don't really know proficient, but it's just the best word that I could come up with. 4 is excelling, and 5 is mastery. And I feel like they can understand that a lot more. And so I found video clips of different bike level skill, like bike riding skills, and showed them, okay, here's a 1. And I showed them picture or videos of kids like falling off bikes or running into things or attempting to turn and it not really going so well. So like that's a 1 that's struggling. They can't turn, they can't brake, they can't balance. And then a 2, we showed a video of a kid who was kind of wobbly, but he was riding, he didn't fall, and he was able to like hit the brakes and stop on his own. So like that's passing. 3, we showed a video where they went over like 4 different like basic bike riding skills that I feel like you need in order to be proficient at bike riding. And then 4, we showed a video where they were doing a couple of like minor tricks, not too difficult. And then 5, mastery, in order to explain to them that once you've mastered the material, you're able to take that knowledge and apply it to new and different situations. I showed a guy doing a bunch of bike tricks out in the woods and on a farm that like no one would even think of doing, like jumping on a hay bale that's rolling down a hill and, you know, like doing a flip over a log and just like weird but awesome stuff like that. So like that's mastery, being able to take that skill and apply it in a different environment. So my evidence for that, I can provide like I said, the papers that I give them, and I can provide the PowerPoint where I kind of helped them make connections on what the 1 through 5 means. I also want to get better at... Oh, I need to actually post in class, like the grades that they're at. Last year I was really good about changing the grade so that instead of an 85 it said pro, and instead of 100 it said dis for distinguished, but I would change that to master now. It was a lot of time and effort though, admittedly, and so I haven't kept that up this year. But what I really also want to focus on is talking about their learning goals in class every day and making that connection. So when they were learning how to balance chemical equations, one was them understanding that a balanced equation had the same number of each atom on each side. I'm like, okay, y'all are at a 1 now because you at least know what it looks like and what it should be. And then we did on the computer where they had colored models on each side, and they were able to like count the colors on this side and like increase on each side until they had the same number of each color atom on each side. And so I told them that's a level 2 skill, is being able to do this with the model with the computer. And then tomorrow we'll work on a level 3 skill, which is being able to balance it without the model. And I think what I really need to do, especially to have more evidence for my portfolio for this, is to include, at least for the essential standards, all of that in writing. Like level 1 means you understand what a balanced equation should look like. Number 2, you can balance the chemical equation with the assistance of colored models. Number 3, etc. And so I'm going to work on that for the next unit. I'll do that for the essential standard for the next unit. And I think that's it on that one. All right, and then the last one that I had the highest in is engaging students in cognitively complex tasks. At first I was a little surprised that I was the highest in this, and then it dawned on me I probably shouldn't be surprised because it's chemistry, and they think that just chemistry itself is cognitively complex, which it can be dumbed down to not be. But if you do it right, chemistry is the perfect place to do awesome cognitively complex tasks. And my students, according to the data, my students felt most comfortable with testing and explaining hypothesis, which, yay, I was so excited. We started off the school year doing a lot of labs that involved inquiry-based. So like they asked a question or they were posed a question, and then they had the materials in order to test it out. And so they would say, okay, I would, ask them, what do you think's going to happen when you do this? Or how do you think you can manipulate this in order to achieve this? And then they would write down like what they would think the answer was, or what they thought they could do or try, and then they would go and try it. And then they would record their responses, and then they would go back and try again. And so I had them like go through that process. I think they actually went through that process before doing the pre-survey, which is why they were most comfortable explaining hypotheses. I don't know. So I need to continue doing that. We've hit several units where labs just weren't as easy to incorporate, but this upcoming unit we're starting with a lab, so I'm going to kind of modify it to try to include some questions at the beginning where they can, instead of giving them the steps, I'll tell them like, here's the goal, how do you think you can achieve that? Okay, go try it out. And so I can add I still have their lab papers from last semester too, so I can add that in as evidence, and I can add in the lab papers that we're about to do as evidence. Let's see, according to the data, I'm decent at encouraging students to try and see if they're right instead of me just telling them. I don't know that I can really show evidence of that, but I do know that if ever possible and they ask me, Miss, is this right? I will tell them, well, why don't you try it out and see, instead of just saying yes or no, which frustrates the heck out of them. But I think it's really important for them to like try it out, even if they don't think it's right or they're not sure about it, because a lot of them don't want to try and fail, and I want them to be comfortable with failure. And I think I did a lot better job the first semester, or the beginning of the first semester than towards the end. So I'm kind of like, after the break, I'm like getting that back. And then according to the data, the thing I needed to work on most was asking my students questions to help them figure out what kind of task is appropriate for them. So like maybe to me, my interpretation of that is in the lab, whenever they ask, how do I do this? I need to instead just ask a question, well, how do you think you can? What if you da 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 da? What, and like ask more leading questions instead of just telling them a process or saying, well, why don't you try this and see what happens? Just ask those leading questions to try to help guide them to the task that they need to do. And I don't really know how to show evidence of that either, but I know for the hypothesis stuff, I can show my labs, and I do know that I'm pretty good at asking like those higher order thinking questions. And so when I get them engaged in those kind of questions, especially sometimes I'll do them for exit tickets, sometimes I'll do them in the middle of class as an activity, so I can include I can pull the PowerPoint slides that have those questions on and put them together. And then if it's an exit ticket, I can line up all the note cards and take a picture and add that in as evidence. For example, the most recent one I did was in addition to asking them to balance an equation, the next day I asked them, okay, how do you what are the steps you use to balance an equation? Because I never gave them steps to balance it. I showed them many different ways, and we did the computer simulation, and that kind of allowed them to individually figure out what worked for them. So the higher order thinking question would be to explain the process that you specifically used. And I made that very clear with them because some of them even asked. So I can include stuff like that as evidence. And I think that's it. Why did I choose engaging students in cognitively complex tasks? This one wasn't so much because I didn't think I was very good at it, actually, even though Ms. Manier, who is my evaluator, has since told me that I do ask higher order thinking questions in class, even if I don't realize it. Just when I'm teaching and chunking things, I'll ask a higher order thinking question that's not even on the slides, and I guess I don't realize I'm doing it, which is good that I'm able to do it so easily, but also I want to try to be more aware that I'm doing it. So I'm trying to be more aware of the questions that I'm asking in class, and then reflecting, okay, was that HRT or was that just a normal yes, no kind of answer? But I just think it's very, very important for students to be able to critically think as opposed to just memorize and regurgitate. And so I wanted to work on that skill just to help do things that are what I feel are more important with my students. So those are my 3 skills. That's my interpretation of the data. I think I have an okay plan with providing evidence. I would love some feedback on possible evidence that maybe I didn't think of, or if any of that sounds like it won't work or anything. And yeah, so just let me know. Bye.